Queen Camilla asks Princess Catherine to hand over her most precious tiara. The sapphire and diamond masterpiece represents love, heritage, and a direct link to Queen Elizabeth's heart. Queen Camilla asks Princess Catherine to hand over her most precious tiara. The sapphire and diamond masterpiece represents love, heritage, and a direct link to Queen Elizabeth's heart. Prince William publicly confronts Queen Camilla at Princess Charlotte's 10th birthday over Catherine's historic sapphire tiara. According to palace insiders, the tension stemmed from Camilla's controversial request to borrow the George VI Sapphire Tiara, a personal gift from the late Queen Elizabeth II to Catherine, symbolizing trust and royal succession. However, instead of keeping the matter private, Queen Camilla raised the request again in front of guests at Charlotte's birthday, including King Charles and Catherine's parents, Michael and Carol Middleton. The move was widely seen as provocative and intended to embarrass Catherine in front of her family. The confrontation reportedly sparked William's fury. He immediately rose to defend his wife, insisting that the tiara was a deeply meaningful wedding gift, not a ceremonial accessory to be passed around at whim. Catherine is not someone to be manipulated, and what you've done today isn't about royal duty, it's about personal power, William is said to have told Camilla during the tense exchange. She has diamonds, rubies, emeralds, yet it's never enough. Now she wants the one thing that was never meant for her, the sapphire crown Elizabeth gave to Catherine. That was the whispered accusation that passed between corridors and courtyard hedges at Buckingham Palace. On Camilla's 78th birthday, while champagne chilled in crystal flutes and footmen adjusted gold-rimmed place cards, another conversation simmered beneath the surface, one not of celebration, but of possession. The Queen Consort had been gifted a lavish new jewelry set by King Charles, a gleaming collection of emerald-cut diamonds, pear-shaped sapphires, and a striking opal centerpiece strung along a platinum necklace. It was a breathtaking display of extravagance, specially commissioned by the royal jeweler. Earrings, necklace, matching ring, all custom, all expensive. And yet, to Camilla, it was not complete. Her private dresser had noticed at first the way Camilla lingered too long in front of the mirror, frowning. She had on all the jewels, draped and dangling in perfection, but she seemed unsatisfied. Her eyes fixated on the bare crown of her head. "There's no tiara," she muttered. "Why is there no tiara?" When the king's valet revealed that Queen Elizabeth had never officially bequeathed a tiara to Camilla, at least not one of that stature, Camilla's mood turned sharp. The one tiara that would complete her ensemble, the George VI Sapphire Tiara, belonged to someone else. Someone she considered undeserving, Princess Catherine, and it hadn't just been lent, it had been gifted, from Elizabeth herself. As preparations for Camilla's birthday banquet advanced, palace staff buzzed about the news. King Charles had spared no expense, imported wines from Bordeaux, flowers from the Netherlands, music arranged by the Royal Philharmonic. The banquet hall was being reset 3 times for lighting tests alone. Camilla was to be presented like a queen in full regalia, and she intended to look the part. But while servants polished silverware and measured velvet chairbacks, Camilla was plotting her next move. Behind her painted smile and graceful nods, a single glittering thought consumed her. That tiara. It had graced Catherine's head on her wedding day, a piece radiant with blue sapphire and encircled in diamonds, a royal heirloom. But more than that, it had been a personal gift from Elizabeth II, sealed with a private blessing. And Camilla hated that. Hated how Catherine wore it with natural ease. Hated how the public adored her. Hated that every time that tiara appeared, it brought with it the memory of Elizabeth's favor, not for Camilla, but for Catherine. 3 days before the party, Camilla summoned Catherine to the Rose Room, under the guise of discussing seating charts. The room was quiet, perfumed with fresh freesia. Catherine arrived in a pale cream suit, polite and poised. "Darling," Camilla said, her voice silked with civility, "I've been meaning to ask a small favor." Catherine listened, guarded but gracious. "For the birthday banquet," Camilla continued, "I believe your sapphire tiara would complement my new set quite perfectly. For continuity, of course, a symbol of grace and unity." Catherine's fingers twitched slightly at her side. "That tiara was a gift," she replied evenly, "from Her late Majesty." Camilla's expression tightened. "Indeed, but it remains a royal heirloom, and appearances are everything. You wouldn't want the public thinking you're possessive, especially not of your elders." The insult was veiled, but sharp, and it didn't stop there. Camilla leaned forward. "You've always had Elizabeth's favor. Surely, lending a piece just for one night won't undo that legacy?" It was not a request, but a veiled command, laced with resentment and entitlement. Catherine kept her voice steady. "Let me consider." The very next day, whispers began to circulate among staff and courtiers. Some said Catherine had refused. Others said she had agreed, reluctantly. But by the time guests began arriving for the banquet, everyone had an opinion. Then came the boldest move of all. Camilla brought it up again, this time in front of Catherine's parents. The scene was Princess Charlotte's birthday brunch, a cheerful, private family affair at Buckingham Palace. Catherine's parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, had arrived bearing handmade gifts and chocolate cake. But the atmosphere shifted when Camilla raised her glass. Such a lovely gathering. Speaking of family, she began, loud enough for all nearby to hear, I do hope Catherine will reconsider lending me the tiara. After all, what's one piece of jewelry between mother and daughter-in-law? There was a silence sharp enough to slice through silver. Catherine's face froze. Her mother's smile faltered. And that's when William stood up. The silence was unbearable. Camilla's words still echoed, sugar-coated but laced with venom. What's one piece of jewelry between mother and daughter-in-law? Michael Middleton shifted in his seat, his knuckles pale against the porcelain teacup. Carol's smile had long since vanished, her eyes flickering between her daughter and the queen consort. Catherine kept her gaze fixed on the table, the sapphire earrings at her ears glinting in the summer light. But William, he had had enough. He rose slowly. The air in the garden room seemed to thin. Camilla, he said, voice low but unmistakably firm, I think it's time we had a real conversation without masks, without theater. Camilla's lips parted in faint surprise. William, this is your daughter's birthday. Yes, he said evenly, and I won't have it turned into a stage for humiliation. The table froze. A footman nearby stiffened, eyes lowered. Carol placed a gentle hand on Catherine's shoulder, but Catherine remained motionless, back straight, face pale. Camilla tried to recover. No one is humiliating anyone. I merely made a polite request. No, William interrupted. You made a public spectacle. You've raised this in private, and now again in front of my in-laws. This isn't about a tiara. This is about control, and I won't allow you to keep doing this. Camilla's smile began to crack. I don't think you understand the optics. No, William said. I understand them perfectly. What you want is the crown, the spotlight, the last word. But you already have the throne beside my father. Why must you reach for what was never meant for you? Camilla's expression turned cold. Is that what this is about? You think I'm beneath your precious Catherine? William's voice dropped, but it struck like a blade. I think you're trying to rewrite history. That tiara wasn't just a jewel. It was a symbol. My grandmother chose Catherine not just as a bride to her grandson, but as the future of the monarchy. He looked directly at his father then, who had remained conspicuously silent through the ordeal. King Charles sat rigid, lips pursed, avoiding his son's eyes. Father, William said, do you remember what Granny said at our wedding reception? She said, this one will carry the crown with grace. And she wasn't looking at Camilla. The room rippled with tension. Charles finally cleared his throat. This is hardly the place. It's exactly the place, William replied. Because the damage isn't just done behind closed doors anymore. Camilla has twisted protocol to humiliate my wife, and I won't let her do it again. At last, Catherine raised her head. Her voice was soft, but every syllable cut clean through the stillness. I've worn that tiara only twice in public since the Queen's passing. Not because I don't treasure it, but because I do. It is the last thing she gave me, and it doesn't belong in petty politics. Camilla scoffed. Petty? You think royal appearances are petty? I think intentions matter, Catherine said, and yours haven't felt honorable. There was no accusation in her tone, no malice, just quiet, immovable dignity. It was that same composure that had earned her the love of a nation and the trust of a queen. It was also the very thing that seemed to enrage Camilla. You think I'm some villain in your story, Camilla snapped. All I've done is serve this institution. Catherine met her eyes. Serving doesn't mean stealing, especially not memories. Later that afternoon, behind the closed doors of Kensington Palace, William paced the floor of his private study. Catherine sat on the sofa, clutching a handkerchief, her sapphire earrings now removed and lying forgotten on the table. She humiliated you, William said, and tried to make your parents complicit in it. She wanted a reaction, Catherine replied gently. You gave her one, a powerful one. She made you cry, William growled. She made me remember what it feels like to be alone in that palace, she said. To feel like you have no allies. William stopped pacing. He turned toward her, his voice hoarse. You're not alone. Never again. I don't care about titles. I care about you. And Charlotte. And our boys. That's the crown I protect now. Outside palace walls, the press hadn't yet caught wind of the confrontation. But inside, word had already spread. Servants exchanged knowing glances. Aides whispered. Senior officials braced for fallout. One equerry reported overhearing fragments of the conversation to a private secretary. It was brutal, he whispered. William stood up to her, properly, like his mother would have. And that was the phrase that echoed most, like Diana would have. Camilla, in her private quarters, was livid. She embarrassed me, she hissed to her personal aide, in front of commoners. Ma'am, the aide said carefully, they're the Princess of Wales's parents. Exactly, Camilla snapped. And they were supposed to feel small. That night, William wrote a letter. Not to his father, not to the palace press office, but to his late grandmother. He folded the page gently, slid it into a drawer in his desk, beneath a framed photo of Elizabeth. I won't let them erase you, he whispered, or what you gave to her. Outside, the palace lights twinkled like stars reflected in a dark sea. But inside, two sides of the House of Windsor had drawn their lines. One wore a tiara in memory. The other wanted it for power. The war for the crown had only just begun. The walls of Buckingham Palace had never been entirely silent. They carried whispers, soft, elusive, coded. But after William's confrontation with Camilla at Princess Charlotte's birthday brunch, the whispers became louder, sharper. They moved through the hallways like smoke, and smoke always meant fire. In the basement staff dining room, word had spread before the silver trays were even cleared. Did you hear what happened? Whispered Mrs. Hartwell, the senior dresser who'd once served under Queen Elizabeth. Prince William stood up in front of everyone and told her off. Said she was rewriting history. About the tiara? Mrs. Hartwell nodded, chin tight. And about his mother, Thomas, the valet to the king, sighed. This is going to explode. Within 24 hours, the household had begun to divide. Those loyal to the memory of Queen Elizabeth and the late Princess Diana leaned toward Catherine and William. They remembered Catherine's grace, her warmth with the staff, how she remembered birthdays, how she wrote handwritten thank you notes. On the other side stood the newer courtiers, those loyal to Camilla, who owed their appointments to her influence. They whispered that Catherine was too sensitive, too media-trained, too possessive. She's not above the rules, said Jennifer Walsh, Camilla's private secretary, during a closed-door planning session. That tiara is a royal asset. We have every right to request it. But it was a personal gift, one junior assistant dared to reply. Jennifer's stare made clear. You're either with us, or you're replaceable. King Charles had not publicly addressed the incident. Behind closed doors, he asked only one question. Was the press there? No, sir, came the reply. Then let's not add fuel to fire. But fuel was everywhere. In conversations, in duty rosters, in glances. Charles's silence was not neutrality, it was interpreted as tacit approval of Camilla's actions. And worse, it emboldened her. Camilla knew she had lost control of the narrative. Catherine had said little, but William's defense had made headlines. Prince William defends Catherine's legacy, a son's fury for his wife and mother, echoes of Diana. So Camilla went back to the only arena she truly controlled, image. Within days, she arranged a private photo shoot. A single symbolic photograph, her sitting at a gilded vanity, wearing her newly commissioned jewelry, hands clasped regally. The tiara was absent, but its absence was the point. She leaked it subtly, Queen Camilla in personal reflection. The media lapped it up, but inside the palace, everyone saw it for what it was. A message. I may not have the crown, but I still have the frame. Catherine, meanwhile, stayed silent, but she was far from passive. She called for Lady Susan, her most trusted aide. I want a full accounting, Catherine said quietly. Every item gifted to me by the Queen. When, where, in what context? Lady Susan nodded. And the insurance records? All of them. Catherine's voice held no tremble now. The confrontation had stirred something that had long been buried beneath diplomacy. Resolve. And Lady Susan, Catherine added, if anyone asks, this is about inventory. They both knew it wasn't. It was about drawing a line. In the North Wing, a maid named Elsie, who had once served Princess Diana, spoke with trembling conviction. She reminds me of her, she told the laundry team. Not just in the way she walks, in the way she endures. She won't fight dirty, said another. No, Elsie replied, but William will. For her, that was the difference. Diana had fought alone. Catherine had a prince who would raise his voice. As tensions rose, Sir Edward Peaton, the deputy private secretary, summoned a late-night meeting of the Royal Protocol Advisory Committee. We have a problem, he said bluntly. If we allow the conflation of personal gifts and crown assets to continue, we risk eroding precedent. Camilla has been aggressive, one member said delicately, and William has been public. Sir Edward rubbed his temples. We are one headline away from institutional chaos. The room fell silent. Then someone added, what if the king refuses to intervene? Sir Edward's answer was simple. Then the future king already has. That night, Camilla sat alone in her chamber. The vanity lights reflected back a face that was tired, drawn, not from age, but from resistance. She had thought the younger royals would eventually bend to her will, but Catherine hadn't. Worse, William hadn't. On her desk sat a half-written note, addressed to Charles. "My love, I fear your son does not see me as family. He sees me as an interloper." She didn't finish the letter. She didn't need to. She knew the answer already. He would always defend his son, but she would defend her throne. Buckingham Palace had weathered wars, scandals, and abdications. But never before had its walls felt so uncertain, so fractured from within. The portraits of kings and queens stared down from the corridors as if watching a house divide itself. At the center of the storm sat King Charles, not in his throne room, but in his private study, hunched over the same desk where Queen Elizabeth had once signed national declarations. His fingers tapped against the mahogany surface, eyes fixed on a newspaper headline, "William's Loyalty, a Prince's Fury for His Princess." The photo beneath was telling. William, jaw clenched, standing beside Catherine, who looked calm, unshakable. The piece praised his protective instincts, his modern strength, his commitment to dignity in the face of royal tension. There was no mention of Charles, and more importantly, none of Camilla. The king leaned back in his chair, removing his glasses. Camilla had been his companion in the darkest moments of his life. She had waded through scandal, endured public scorn, and finally, she had been accepted by both crown and country. But now, that fragile acceptance teetered on the edge of collapse. And the tipping point? A tiara, or so it seemed on the surface. He knew better. This wasn't about jewelry. It was about power, about legacy, and about Catherine, his daughter-in-law who, without ever demanding attention, had captured the heart of a nation. That morning, Charles had attempted to bring calm. He invited both Camilla and William for a private tea in the garden room. Camilla arrived early, dressed in powder blue, diamonds glinting, expression cool. William entered with a slight nod, refusing tea. The silence between them was frost. Charles cleared his throat. "This family must present unity. That's what your grandmother always said." William's reply was clipped. "Unity isn't silence, and it certainly isn't submission." Camilla sighed audibly. "I never imagined a tiara would cause such hysteria." "It's not the tiara," William snapped. "It's your treatment of my wife." Camilla stood abruptly. "I won't be vilified for fulfilling my role. You two have always had the public's favor. Don't punish me because people still compare me to ghosts." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Charles spoke softly. "Enough. We cannot continue like this." But as they left separately, it was clear. Nothing had been resolved. That night, Catherine stood alone in the royal gardens, facing the Queen's Rose Arch. It had been Elizabeth's favorite retreat, a place of quiet, of clarity. Lady Susan approached, holding a tablet. "Your Highness, there's something you need to see." It was a trending video taken by a child at Charlotte's birthday party. Unintentionally, it had captured Camilla's pointed comment and William's defense. Though grainy, the audio was clear. By morning, the clip had gone viral. "She's always had Elizabeth's favor. Surely lending a tiara isn't so much to ask. You've twisted protocol to humiliate my wife, and I won't let you do it again." Millions had viewed it. Hashtags exploded. Number, protect Catherine. Whale strong. Number, Northern crown. The people had chosen a side, and it wasn't Camilla's. That afternoon, Catherine received an invitation to represent the royal family at a veterans' memorial ceremony in York, a role traditionally filled by the Queen Consort. Camilla had declined, citing fatigue. Charles approved Catherine as her replacement. Some said it was a peace offering. Others called it a quiet endorsement. Regardless, Catherine accepted. When she arrived, the crowd erupted in applause. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair tied back. No tiara, no jewels. Just a silver poppy pin once worn by Queen Elizabeth during a wartime speech. She knelt before a wounded soldier's widow and whispered, "He will not be forgotten." The woman's tears said more than any speech. Photos of the event circulated within hours. Catherine shines in York, the people's princess, reborn. No crown, still queen. Even critics praised her empathy. Within the palace, aides felt the tide turn. One senior official whispered to another, "The public already sees her as their queen." And at Clarence House, Camilla threw down a newspaper with a bitter laugh. "She's not even trying, and still look at her." Her aide said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Meanwhile, at Kensington Palace, William reviewed a report from a trusted private secretary. "Are the staff secure?" he asked. "They're with you, sir," quietly but firmly. And my father?" The secretary hesitated. "He's torn, but he's watching. Closely." William nodded. He had no desire to replace Camila. He had no taste for drama, but he would not allow his wife to be targeted again. not by anyone. That evening, King Charles entered his mother's private library. He stood before the locked cabinet where her personal archives were stored. He held a small velvet box, the one that had once carried the sapphire tiara. He whispered, "You chose her, didn't you?" There was no answer, only silence. But even silence sometimes holds judgment. For the first time in months, Queen Camilla canceled all public engagements. No explanation was offered. No photographs appeared in the papers. Her absence was noted not through headlines, but in silence, the silence of someone no longer front and center. Officially, she had retired to Raymill House, her private estate in Wiltshire, for rest and recovery. Unofficially, palace insiders whispered the truth. Camilla had been sidelined. She was still queen, but not the one people were looking for. At Buckingham Palace, senior aides scrambled to adjust the schedule. Appearances originally designated for Camilla were discreetly reassigned to Catherine. Garden parties, patronage visits, and even upcoming diplomatic receptions slowly began to list the Princess of Wales as the lead royal figure. Each new assignment was a subtle signal. Catherine was rising. In one closed-door meeting, a courtier remarked, "We haven't seen public favor shift this swiftly since Diana." Another replied, "Perhaps it never shifted. Perhaps it's just returning." Camilla spent her days pacing her study, surrounded by fresh-cut flowers and silence. The royal jewelry set Charles's birthday gift lay untouched in its velvet case. It mocked her now. No matter how dazzling, it could not compete with the tiara she had failed to claim. Her staff tiptoed around her. Even the dogs, once noisy companions, grew subdued. She no longer checked the papers herself. But each morning, her lady's maid placed them neatly on the side table, folded to the society section. Catherine's composure restores royal grace. Charles delegates more duties to Princess of Wales. Camilla's absence leaves gap or opportunity. The last one stung worst. Back at Kensington Palace, Catherine received an unexpected visit from Princess Anne. The meeting was brief, unannounced, and took place in a quiet drawing room over Earl Grey tea. Anne, ever blunt, began without ceremony. "You handled her well," she said. "Grace under pressure, that's rare." Catherine smiled faintly. "I didn't want a war." "Good," Anne replied. "Because it's already happening, whether you asked for it or not." Catherine hesitated. "I never wanted to replace anyone." End of from. "You didn't," Anne said flatly. "You just outshone her. And that, my dear, she cannot forgive." A pause passed between them before Anne added, "Stay steady. Let others lose control. The crown always follows still hands." With that, she stood and left. It was the closest thing to a royal endorsement Catherine had ever received. The pressure on King Charles was building. Diplomats now requested meetings with William and Catherine instead of Camilla. Charities flooded the palace, with requests for the Princess of Wales to become patron. Even foreign press outlets began referring to her not just as future queen, but as the face of the monarchy. During a quiet dinner with his private secretary, Charles confessed, "I fear the transition is already underway, and I'm still here." His aide responded carefully, "The monarchy survives because it adapts. It must." Charles looked down at his plate, untouched. He didn't answer. Later that night, in their shared apartment at Kensington, William found Catherine reading by the fire. He joined her quietly. "She's vanished," he said. "Retreated to Raymill." "I know," Catherine replied. "But she'll return. She won't stay quiet forever." William watched the flames for a moment. "I don't want this to be about who wins." Catherine turned to him, eyes steady. "It isn't. It's about who protects what matters. You did that for me." He reached for her hand. "And I always will." Within the palace, even longtime Camilla loyalists began stepping back. One of her senior advisors requested reassignment. Another took a sudden leave of absence. Meanwhile, Lady Susan, Sir Edward, and other key officials continued quietly supporting Catherine's growing role. They created new briefings, prepared future tours, began drafting proposals for shared leadership with William. Behind every meeting, every press release, every calendar change, a new royal structure was being built. Not loudly, not officially, but unmistakably. Back at Raymill, Camilla stood before the mirror. Not the grand ones of Buckingham, but the old one in her childhood bedroom, the only place she hadn't redecorated. She stared at her reflection, stripped of jewels, stripped of posture. She saw a woman aging, alone, and for the first time unsure of her place. Then she whispered to no one, "They'll regret this." 3 weeks passed. Camilla remained at Raymill. Her absence no longer made headlines. Catherine's presence had filled the void. The monarchy hadn't stumbled, it had steadied. In fact, it had evolved. And now, it was time for the final shift. On a gray Monday morning, a formal notice was quietly circulated among senior staff, media correspondents, and international dignitaries. By order of the sovereign, All personal gifts from Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, shall be regarded as private property of the recipient. This includes, but is not limited to, the George VI Sapphire Tiara, now permanently assigned to the Princess of Wales. There was no press conference, no public statement, but the message was clear. The matter was closed. Catherine's sapphire crown was hers and hers alone. That evening, William requested a private audience with his father. The two men met in the king's study, bookshelves towering, the fireplace lit, the space quiet but tense. Charles gestured for him to sit. William remained standing. "I'm not here to argue," he said. "I'm here to make something clear." Charles folded his hands. "Go on. Catherine is not an accessory to be borrowed, pressured, or humiliated. Not by Camilla. Not by anyone. The woman who carries the crown one day will do so with dignity, not fear. End of." Charles said nothing for a moment, then spoke softly. "She reminds me of your mother, you know." "I know," William replied. "But unlike her, Catherine will not stand alone." Charles sighed. "I see that now." Camilla returned to the palace in early August. There was no fanfare, no cameras, no banquets. She resumed some duties, charity visits, small receptions, but the grand stage was gone. The jewelry set gifted to her for her birthday, still untouched. At one garden event, she was asked casually by a foreign diplomat, "Will we see you wear the sapphire crown soon, Your Majesty?" Camilla smiled thinly. "It was never mine to wear." At the king's request, the full family gathered at Balmoral for their annual summer break. It was meant to be healing. It wasn't. Photos were staged, smiles practiced, but insiders saw the distance. Catherine and William dined separately from Charles and Camilla on most nights. Charlotte, now aware in a way only children can be, asked her mother one evening, "Why doesn't Granny Camilla like you?" Catherine smiled gently. "Sometimes grown-ups get confused between respect and rivalry." Charlotte nodded. "But Daddy always picks you." "Yes," Catherine said, "and I pick peace." The final shift came quietly. During a tour of a children's hospice in Wales, Catherine was presented with a handmade crown made of blue felt and sparkly paper jewels. She knelt as the child placed it on her head. A photographer captured the moment. That image went viral in hours. The crown that matters. A princess, a mother, a queen in waiting. It wasn't regal. It was real. And that made all the difference. In the weeks that followed, Camilla began to retreat further from center stage. She focused on niche patronages, quiet meetings, and avoided large state ceremonies. In private, she still bristled, but she had lost the room, the public, and more importantly, the king's silent permission to dominate the family narrative. One evening, she returned to the mirror, not to check her appearance, but to ask herself the question she could never quite shake. What if I had let go of the crown and held the family instead? She would never know the answer. Autumn brought a formal portrait of the royal line, King Charles at center. To his right, William and Catherine, standing tall, regal but warm. To his left, Camilla, seated, hands folded, gaze soft. But the tiara, that unmistakable sapphire crown, rested only on Catherine's head. It gleamed beneath the palace lighting, not just a symbol of royalty, but of restraint, grace, and earned reverence. The monarchy survived, not because of jewels, but because of those who wore them with meaning. Camilla still held her title, but Catherine held something more enduring: the people's trust, the crown's future, and her husband's unwavering vow. At a quiet family dinner weeks later, William raised a glass, looked toward Catherine, and said simply, "To the only queen I'll ever fight for." She didn't need a reply. The whole room already knew.